Imagine a client comes to you and they say, I need a website. It always sounds simple at first, right? Except, do you know what platform you're going to be building on? And do you know what they actually need to do it? And do you know who's going to manage it after it's done? If you can't answer these questions in the first conversation, you're already setting yourself up for a very painful project. Here is how I make sure this never happens. Look, I've helped build over 300 websites for clients over the last decade, and the one thing that makes a project go sideways often has nothing to do with the platform it's built on, or the design, or even the client. They fall apart because I didn't have a real process. But once I did, everything changed. So I'm gonna walk you through that exact process and how I ensure that every project I take on, I approach the same way to get an amazing result every time. And what a fitting collaboration. Today's video is sponsored by Cloudways. More on that later. Now, the problem I realized for myself, and maybe you could relate, is that often I suggest the tool that I am most comfortable with, or I suggest the process I'm most comfortable with. But the reality is that every client comes to you with a specific set of needs, and those needs may dictate a different workflow, and those needs may need a completely different approach than what you're used to or what's most familiar. And what makes that hard is what I just said introduces a million approaches that is impossible to consider when you're starting a new project with every single client. So let me walk you through how I actually approach this, because once you have a real process here, the steps that you're gonna take are gonna make your clients happier, it's gonna make your process easier, reduce revisions, and get to completion faster. And the first part, you may already have this, is discovery. Before I open any design tool, before I even think about what platform we're gonna build on, I have a discovery conversation with the brand. And this is probably the most important aspect of the entire project. There are a few questions I always make sure I get clear answers on. The first one is, what is the primary goal of the entire website and build that we're working on? Not the aesthetic look, not the feel, not the pages, not the CMS, but what is the goal of the website? Is it to generate leads, sell products, book calls online, establish your credibility in the industry, have a blog that you have a ton of people reading from either AI or SEO? Is it a marketing website for a software solution? The answer to that question shapes every single decision that comes after. Second, who is the key audience? Is it a B2B consulting firm targeting CFOs who need a completely different website than a local bakery trying to get some foot traffic? These questions begin to help us understand the best platform, the design, the copy, the call to action, all of those core features of building a beautiful web experience. But we can't leave it at that. Third, and this one is the most underrated in my opinion, who is gonna manage the website after it's handed off? If the client isn't technical and they're gonna need to update their own content, that is gonna change the entire experience. If they have dev teams internally, that will change it as well. Or if they're gonna hire you for monthly maintenance, that's gonna change it as well. Then we need to take a look at what their current website analytics show us, where their audience is coming from, how big their audience is. Do they have traffic spikes at certain times, or is it more consistent throughout the month? Understanding the demands of the actual infrastructure is gonna be really important as well. Next, what's the budget and the timeline? Because the more time you have, the more custom it can be. But if the budget is also lower and there's not a lot of time, it's really important to know if you're operating in a very custom environment with devs who are going to support the site after, or if you need more of a drag and drop experience. In my opinion, none of these tools are necessarily better. It's just what's the right tool for the use case. Now, with those answers in front of us, we now have the ability to give proper recommendations. And if you're newer to web design or working with clients at scale, one of the things I've learned is speak the least amount in the beginning and just ask the most amount of questions. Make recommendations only when you have all the details. I'll say it this way, I look the dumbest when I'm making recommendations before I even have all the clear details of the project. And with what we've covered so far, one other thing that's really important as well is the actual content, the layout, the CMSs, everything you're gonna need with the actual website website build. So if it's a marketing website and you might have 2 or 3 CMSs, that's great. But if it's a more in-depth build that needs very custom CMSs and linking of those CMSs and a lot more, it's good to know that as well. But the 5 key things I laid out in this video so far are gonna help you actually understand what's the best platform and hosting for your client. Now, this is where you can offer a recommendation. And this is where you gotta be careful to not go with your default or what you're most comfortable with. Find the right fit for the client based on their needs. And this is why a lot of clients end up with really frustrated experiences. A WordPress developer only builds on WordPress, a Webflow designer only builds on Webflow, and then a Framer developer only develops on Framer. The platform should serve the client, not the other way around. Here's how I actually think about this. If the client needs something clean, simple, and easy to manage on their own after the handoff, I am not afraid to use a drag and drop editor. For most businesses starting out, this is a great place to start. The interface is intuitive, it's gonna look good out of the box. Is it gonna be the most aesthetic and beautiful? Probably not, but it's gonna give them a lot of control. Then if you do need something in the middle that's more custom, you could go for a more advanced editor like a Webflow or Framer. Or if you do need to go really custom, or you need to build out, let's say 150 local websites for different franchisees for this client, building something that they're going to be able to manage afterwards, have the hosting and everything included, is going to be completely different than a drag and drop editor. Now, I have a ton of videos covering different builders out there if you are looking for the best builder, but let's continue with our process here to make sure we actually give the client what they need. Now, the more custom you go, you may end up going with a platform like WordPress. And this is going to work great whether you have one site or you need to deploy 150 websites. But a key part of this conversation that comes up is going to be around hosting. Because when you go more custom like this, the hosting is going to be really important. You're going to need something that scales with your client's needs and that can grow without inflating the budget. And that's where I am so grateful for today's sponsor, because getting this wrong is going to create headaches for you that are going to follow every single month after the project is done. When you're building on WordPress or any custom stack, hosting is not an afterthought. It is part of the product. And if you are managing a lot of client projects at once and you are managing the hosting, which I hope you are, you need a hosting setup that actually scales with you without costs spiraling every single time you add on a new client. And this is why I use Cloudways. Cloudways is a managed cloud hosting platform that is built specifically for agencies and developers. And what stands out to me the most immediately is that you pay per server, not per site. So you can host as many client projects as you want on a single server without adding a new line item every single time. Just think about that for a minute. For anyone running an agency or even just managing a handful of client sites, that model makes a lot of sense. And the best part is you could pick any of the cloud providers that you see on my screen, like DigitalOcean or AWS, and you manage everything from one clean dashboard that's actually built for agency owners. You get built-in staging environments, which means you'll never be pushing untested work directly to a live website, and you get automated backups, built-in security, and their AI copilot is proactively making sure everything is running, so you're not the one stuck troubleshooting something at midnight. Plus, if you're hosting client sites somewhere else and you need help transferring, their team at Cloudways will help you do it. Plus, the first one is free, and that means there's no friction to get started. Let me tell you more about the agency partnership program with Cloudways. First, you're gonna get a dedicated account manager, also gonna get priority support and partner level perks that actually matter when you're juggling multiple clients at once. I have an entire video breaking down Cloudways for you that you'll find down below. But if you are ready to get started with Cloudways, click that first link down below in the description. Now, let's get back to the build. Once the platform is locked in and the client has signed off on the direction, this is where the fun begins. You get to begin building. And there are a few things that make this phase go really smooth versus turning it into a nightmare. First, get content locked in before you start building. The client should try to give you as much copy, images, assets before you start touching design. This often derails the project more than anything, because if you have an unclear sense of the amount of content per page and throughout the site, you are not going to know where to put emphasis for the brand. And then that means you're going to be restructuring everything down the road. Then, depending on how extensive the build is, I often recommend two different approaches. If the build is less than, let's say, 20 pages or even say 12 pages, that's probably a more realistic number, I would build out the entire website for the client before they see it. Now, if it's more than that and it does get closer to 20 plus pages, I would probably build out a few core pages for the client so they can see the look and feel before we start scaling the website. And that way we could get approval in phase 1 before we go to scale with everything that we want to build. This also keeps the client feeling involved and is going to drastically reduce any kind of errors if you find yourself in the middle of the project and they completely don't like something, but you've invested a ton of time into it. One of my favorite pieces of advice here is deliver at 80, which means get the site up to about 80% or whatever stage you're going to need to get approval before you go to the next piece, because you could probably actually get there really fast, and that's going to help you get sign off and make sure you're headed in the right direction. At the same time, I do avoid the client ever seeing half finished work, because that could lead to a lot more confusion and guessing and then wrong guessing. But generally, if you could get the client happy with where the website is at so that you can make proper decisions to scale, this could save a lot of time. Now, once I have a more full version of the website, we gotta get into revisions. This can get messy fast. The way I avoid it getting really messy is being very clear on how revisions work. And this is actually in the contract up front. Here's how it goes. Once I deliver the website, the client and the team will get to review it and give feedback across the entire website. Then my team doesn't do any revisions until the client has reviewed the entire website and given all their feedback. And I try to be very clear when I say all. That way the client and my team know if the ball is in our court or in their court. It is a really frustrating process to get revisions for one page and then later on the next page and then later on the next page, and then they make changes to the first page. It gets complicated quickly if you don't have a set system. And I have found this to work the best, and it also puts a sense of urgency on the project because the client knows that we are not going to do anything until we get clear revisions across everything. Oh, that rhymed. Now, once all the revisions are done and we're getting ready for the handoff stage, this is really important to factor in as well. A couple things that my team does to make this a really good process. We plan the specific launch date with the client. We try to also avoid it being a major launch for the brand as well if we can. That way, if there is any type of issue, we don't get pressed or cause a big disruption for the client. We will also record a few videos walking through the website and understanding how it's structured, whether that's for them or their devs, and making sure they understand where they could find everything. Then, if there are any logins or associated accounts or things that we need to transfer, we'll do that. And we'll even build out a Notion page and put all key information on that page. So it will include any type of recordings or any links or any resources that will help them manage the website. Now, I would say that most people remember the very beginning of a project and the very end. And whether this has been a peaceful process, an exciting process, or a very frustrating process, my biggest recommendation is try to make the end as delightful as possible. This is the last thing they're going to remember you with, and if they come back or recommend you, make this an experience that is delightful. Now, I know none of that is necessarily complicated, but most designers and agencies skip some of those steps, and that's where everything breaks down. If you are building on a custom stack and you provide hosting to your clients, definitely make sure you take a look at Cloudways in the first link down below in the description. It is genuinely one of the most powerful and easy ways to get everything set up without the additional overhead. And if you found this video helpful, definitely consider subscribing down below. If you have questions, drop them in the comments. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.